Hey everyone, Pugs here with one new review for y'all. As y'all can clearly see, today's episode is Atlantis SquarePantis, otherwise known as the very first SpongeBob SquarePants TV movie. It's also known as a few other things, like infamous, notorious, shitty, and a whole other slew of unkind words, but those are all things that I will be discussing once the review begins in earnest. And before I do that, as always, thank you all for watching the review today. This is a pretty exciting one, being a TV movie, and do y'all see these graphics? That was hard work. Now, let's just get right into it. Well. Atlantis SquarePantis, we meet at last. When I saw that this was the episode on my reviewing slate, I was a little surprised. I still feel like I'm barely into season 5, but I guess that isn't quite true, so... Atlantis SquarePantis is yet another one of this show's infamous episodes, though I think over the years, as in the years we've become more separated from the mid-2010s, I think opinions have improved. In my original review of this episode, I came right out and said my opinion on this one, but I'll wait until the end this time. Let you guys make some guesses as to what my thoughts might be. I will say, though, that this episode gives me quite a bit of nostalgia. So y'all might remember what I talked about in my 300 subscriber Q&A with one of my favorite games of all time, SpongeBob Atlantis Square Off, which was obviously based on this episode. There's also other things that have encouraged these nostalgic feelings in me, such as this one game on Nick.com that I'd always play, Atlantis SquarePantis Bus Rush, and that's linked in the description. Oh, and another thing was that there was this Minecraft map that I used to play that had Atlantis in it as well. And this is a different map than the one I mentioned in my review of SB129, if you even remember that, and that is also linked in the description. I just love to share the love. So, like usual when I'm reviewing special episodes, I'm going to start by talking about the patchy segments. During these segments, just like these segments in any episodes, I find myself very entertained by the horribly yet hilariously low-budget production of the patchy segments. The so very clearly green screen scene of the pirates stuck in traffic is amazing. I love it so much. And I've been thinking about this, but like the only reason I can stand to be in traffic is by listening to my own music, treating it as a listening session, so I can completely understand Patchy's reaction here when his tape falls apart. I especially understand it when he reveals that this traffic is causing him to miss the new SpongeBob SquarePants episode, because that is a travesty. Patchy is such a riot because I'm always cracking up during his segments. Since they only happen a few times a season at most, they're always such a treat. The whole part where he yells at the flabbergasted guy behind him, who, fun fact, was played by Paul Tippett, was great. The way Patchy always ties his horrible tragedy of a life to a SpongeBob episode is just so me-core, which I've said before, but it's still true. Patchy being stranded in the desert is hilarious, especially once he starts hallucinating. It's all so bizarre and random. Even the fact that he randomly gets lost in the desert is also bizarre. I just really love all of this. And once again, Patchy is so me, because I also hate mayo. And then out of nowhere, the aliens show up and things continue to be bizarre, and I love it. 10 out of 10 Patchy segment. No notes. Alright. Now that I've discussed Patchy, it's time to talk about the real star of the show, SpongeBob SquarePants himself. Did y'all know that this was originally going to be an 11-minute episode? I'm glad it got bumped to TV movie status, because that extra air of gravity really fits in this episode, and the triumphant music of the title card gets us right into that mood. This episode begins with SpongeBob blowing bubbles and Patrick trying to capture these bubbles on camera but failing horribly. This beginning part is alright. It's a good setup for what we'll be seeing later, but itself it is not particularly funny or enjoyable. This part of the episode also gives us our first song, because yes, this is a musical episode. This song, the Bubble Song, is actually my least favorite of the entire episode, so it's kinda good that it's the first song, since that means it can only get better from here. Because I had the SpongeBob Greatest Hits album as a child, and so I've heard this song many times. It's not a bad song at all. I actually do like it. It just isn't as good as the rest. But I will say that the visuals of the song are really fun and elevate this song compared to listening to it alone. And Tom Kenny and Bill Fagerbakke demonstrate some great singing abilities here, so that's always great. Another thing I like to see is the plot getting moving real quick when the first segment is beginning to slow, and this episode understands that it needs to move the plot, so when SpongeBob and Patrick get trapped in the bubble, they float on over to what turns out to be the lost fragment of the Atlantis medallion real quick. And when Patrick says SquarePantis, I get reminded that even though it's rather simple, I kind of really like the title of this episode. It just flows off the tongue, what could I say? As we move on over to the museum, we see the introduction of the other main characters of this episode. Because Atlantis SquarePantis is a special, this episode, thankfully, involves all 5 of the big 5, with the addition of Plankton. So let me talk a little bit about these introductions because I'm reminded so much of Help Wanted in the way that this episode introduces the characters in a very characterizing way, and also shows what their main goal is going to be in Atlantis before they start explicitly saying so. Like Mr. Krabs, we see him doing something so illegal just to make a quick buck, which I always find to be funny. And yes, people could probably complain about how this demonstrates that the show has flanderized his character by making him more of a criminal than a greedy boss, but personally I think Mr. Krabs has always been a criminal, but okay. And also, it's funny, so now what? Anyway, moving on. Next we see Squidward, who is at the museum because he's interested in art. And for whatever reason he's allowed to paint in the museum. Okay, Squidward is the one who tells SpongeBob and Patrick about what exactly they just found, and I really like how Squidward's kinda an expert in what people know about Atlantis. It's nice to see him have knowledge about something and have him have that place of importance in an episode. Our last character, Sandy, comes out of nowhere, so her introduction is not nearly as strong as the others, and y'all already know how I feel about that. Cough, cough, misogyny, cough. Anyway, Sandy is here for science. And as this scene plays out, I really like how the big 5 are all together sharing in this goal to get to Atlantis, and it also means that we get to see some character interactions between everyone. Well, not really, but I do get Sandy saying Squidward's name, so that's basically the same thing, right? And, oh, also, one last thing, but I really like the animation in this part. It's very expressive. Unfortunately, for the sake of trying to get a picture to represent this paragraph, I chose an image that, while somewhat expressive, isn't quite to the level as the rest of the scene, but seriously, every character makes great faces during this scene. Moving on, a bus appears basically out of thin air, and its interior looks so weird. It's just odd to look at in this show, and I'm sure it's because it's 3D, though I kinda like that it looks weird. It shows that Atlantis is this very different place that all of our characters haven't seen before, till now. And the bus is out of fuel, so everyone pushes the bus to the gas station only to find out that they need to sing to fuel the vehicle. I thought this part was funny. We then get the musical aspect of this episode rolling as we move into our next song, Fueling the Bus, where everyone sings about why they want to go to Atlantis and what it'll be like there. I thought that the song was cute, and I liked how everyone put their own little spin on the song. The song always reminds me of Fred's song, Hey All You People from Jellyfish Hunter. I also think it's kind of funny how during the song we see Plankton for the first time because he really just appeared out of nowhere. It's kind of weird how we didn't even see like a small setup scene with him, but maybe it was cut because of time constraints, who knows. The song ends with Patrick being unable to carry on the tune. This wasn't particularly funny. I feel like I would have liked it if we at least got a little bit of a real song from Patrick, but oh well. We then finally reach Atlantis, or more accurately, crash land into Atlantis, and this place looks gorgeous. I would never want to live in that architecture, but it looks neat anyway. The part with the king tripping down all the stairs was pretty amusing, and speaking of the king, David Bowie did a great job of voicing the guy. And if anyone ever wondered why LRH never got a song despite the fact that David Bowie was literally a singer, it was because the casting happened too late into the production process to give him one. So let's put that criticism to rest, please. Anyway, I think it's funny that LRH is super hospitable to a bunch of strangers who want to take advantage of the Atlantean resources, but I guess this is an idealized world. It's nice to see everyone getting along, even when Mr. Krabs is unbelievably rude. LRH even just lets Mr. Krabs take money from the treasure room, which is heaven for him. And this moves us to our next song, which I really enjoyed. Like I discussed in my review of Money Talks, I love how they always give Mr. Krabs' songs a kind of sea shanty vibe. It's a fun character touch, just like how they countryfy Sandy's songs. This song also had some fun visuals. As for Sandy, her heaven on Earth, or underwater, is an advanced science lab. I love the whole gaming aspect of hers, with everyone getting pixelated and fighting germs. Sandy's song is really good as well, and the whole scene is pretty funny. The visuals of this song are similarly excellent. I really love how her scene combines the fact that she's a scientist and an action squirrel. She can do it all. Her song is one of my favorites, even though it's so short. And, I mean, I like all the songs in this episode. Like, Plankton's is also good. Plankton's weapon fixation is new, but I like it well enough, and it serves this story. And I guess I'll round out this section by discussing Squidward entering his personal heaven, which is the Hall of Arts. I like how LRH just throws Squidward into the painting because that was some funny physical comedy, but also because the ability to step into paintings is super cool, and Squidward's song is really good as well, and full of some fun visuals as he goes from painting to painting. It reminds me of the Squidward song Superior, which is off of the Best Day Ever album. I just listened to it for the first time a few months ago, and I love how it's like a radio show. Love a good concept album. I also like the part at the very end of his section where he starts posing for the artist. That one pose he makes is so funny to me because of how serious he looks. Moving on, SpongeBob and Patrick finally get the spotlight back on them as they finally see the bubble they've been coveting. I also really like the very throwaway, subtle reveal that the Atlanteans are aliens too, and that art was really cool. I just wish they didn't say colonize, like that's a major eye roll from me. And of course, things end in disaster for SpongeBob and Patrick as when they take a picture of the bubble, it pops. Their panic smiles followed by their reactions is hilarious. Definitely the funniest moment in the episode for sure. We move on to dinner, where SpongeBob and Patrick are basically shitting their pants the whole time, which is amusing. When Sandy shows off her invention, a super rare but very good track, Happy Bells, plays. This track has only played twice, and I need it to play more. Anyway, I love the tension when SpongeBob and Patrick enter the room. Their faces are just great and so expressive, and we get a Gary surprise appearance, which makes me happy, and y'all know I have to point that out. Turns out, the bubble SpongeBob and Patrick popped wasn't the real one, and then LRH loses all brain cells and takes out the real one. You can only blame yourself, ma'am. The ensuing action sequence is fun, though poor Sandy gotta do everything around here, shaking my head, and then Plankton shows up with a giant tank, ruining everything by covering everyone in ice cream. Yeah, climax ends very abruptly, continuing a trend of things ending kinda abruptly that I've been noticing lately, but it makes sense in this episode in a way since this is of course a callback to Atlantis being anti-weaponry now. Plankton then becomes the new treasure of Atlantis, which resolves things nicely for the Big Five. And we of course cannot end the episode without one last song, which, like the others, is really great. I really liked the composition of this one with the polyphony, like where SpongeBob and the rest are singing two different things. I always love a good polyphony moment. SpongeBob's enthusiasm about returning home is just so cute and wholesome, and I love how he's the only one who's happy. The background of Bikini Bottom also looks fantastic, and coupled with the fading vocals, it is a great shot to end our episode on. So yeah, I like Atlantis SquarePantis, and I stand by that opinion. Out of all of the infamous specials of this show, I believe that this is one of the best. I won't say the best since I haven't covered the others on the channel yet, but it's up there for sure. I kind of don't really understand the hate for this episode, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. I know there was hate, but what even were the complaints? Like, was it that the episode wasn't funny and was boring? Because those are fair. This isn't the funniest episode, though I don't think it's boring. This episode is definitely better than Party Pooper Pants and The Sponge Who Could Fly, for sure. Atlantis SquarePantis has its high points and its low points, but it's pretty enjoyable throughout. The pacing was probably its biggest issue, since the climax was resolved rather abruptly and with no real time taken for it, but hey, what can you do? All of this is why I'm putting Atlantis SquarePantis in my good tier, where it comes in with a score of 7.5 out of 10. Now, if you excuse me, I'm going to shelter in place from the pitchforks and torches. As always, I'm gonna end this review with some closing thoughts of mine. So, one thing I was thinking about, but couldn't find a place to talk about anywhere during the review, is a comment I made while reviewing, I think, maybe Have You Seen the Snail? It was during a review of a special for sure, and pretty sure it was during a review of a special during season 4 or 5. But anyway, I had mentioned that something that the show frequently has trouble with is wisely filling all of the time during their special episodes. A struggle that likely comes from the fact that this show is almost always in the 11-minute format, and so it can be hard to double that, or in this episode's case, quadruple it. Though this episode is helped by the patchy segments being pretty lengthy, meaning the animated parts are only 32 minutes long. So still longer than a standard special, but shorter than the entire 40-minute runtime. But anyway, so yes, I've noticed that this show has had this problem, but frankly when it comes to this episode, I think it actually managed to avoid that problem. Or really, it had that problem in the opposite direction. It feels like there actually was not enough time in the episode, and so certain things were a little rushed, like the climax. I think that could have worked if it was a little funnier and slightly more built up, though, so it wasn't an issue of time necessarily, but of some writing weaknesses. But I'm pointing all of this out, because in general, this is a good thing. This might mean that as we encounter more specials, the crew might start to perfect them in this way, to where it feels like they're using all of the time they have effectively, not padding it and not rushing it, but moving things along at the perfect pace. I guess we'll have to wait and see about that. And that's all I've got for y'all today. So I'm gonna end things here, and I'll see y'all in the next review.